Someone we see often, it is good to see you. If you are not, it is especially good to see you. We are grateful that more folks within the Linton community and beyond wanted to be here this evening. We're excited to have this conversation and excited that our church can be open for such a dialogue. I want to do a couple of housekeeping things first. If you need restrooms, you need to go right down those stairs. You will find them on the next level. If stairs are tricky, there's an elevator that can get you there also. The point of this evening is not to raise a ton of money. It's not a fundraiser first, but it is a fundraiser also. And so you'll see in this room in a few spots and in the fellowship hall when you go downstairs for a reception, these bins. Any money that we find in them at the end of the day, we're going to put toward our youth mission trips. In the last couple of years, we took a group of kids to Puerto Rico to do hurricane cleanup after Maria, and this past summer to Lumberton, North Carolina, impoverished part of North Carolina that was hit with 2 hurricanes in the last 3 summers. And so that's the kind of thing we're doing with our young people here and could certainly use your support. So if that's something that you would like to help us with, find those green bins. That is where you'll find those. For our regulars, I want to point out this would be a good evening to try a different seat out. Some of you have been forced into different seats because we shut the balcony down, and I saw you going like this when you got in your pews. But is that right? Good. We've already found one thing in common, Rabbi Besser. But I do welcome you. I am grateful that each of you is here. We had hoped there would be a good turnout, and I'm happy for each of you that decided to be with us. Rabbi Brian Besser has served Congregation Beth Shalom in Bloomington since 2012. Congregation Beth Shalom is a diverse Jewish community whose members range from highly observant to secular and include many interfaith families. In his role, Rabbi Besser is often called upon as public spokesperson for Jews around the southern Indiana region. He has spearheaded a number of local interfaith initiatives, including Building Bridges, a tripartite program that brings together Jewish, Muslim, and evangelical Christian communities, as well as the Bloomington Area Interfaith Alliance, which he currently serves as co-chair. BAIA consists of members from a multitude of religious traditions coming together to share diverse perspectives of faith and to promote mutual principles of compassion, peace, social and economic justice, and stewardship of the earth. Outside of Rabbi Besser's rabbinic work, his greatest passion is hiking, particularly long-distance backpacking. In 1988, he trekked 2,600 miles from Mexico to Canada on the Pacific Crest Trail. Nature represents his oldest and deepest source of spiritual renewal, and not just in its grandest manifestations. He has come to appreciate the subtle and restful beauty of a quiet walk in the woods of southern Indiana. A few weeks ago, he herniated a disc, so he has been kept from nature and is going to sit down for most of the evening, if that's okay. He's going to share with us for a time, and then we'll have a Q&A. The best we can do is have these 2 mics up front for folks to come forward and ask questions. Please come to the mics because we are recording this for some folks who couldn't be with us tonight to share with our wider church community after tonight. But we'll have a time of Rabbi Besser sharing some questions to follow, and then a reception downstairs if you would join us as well. I am glad to introduce to you officially someone I'm just getting to know, but I'm grateful came over here, Rabbi Brian Besser.
Thank you, Pastor JD. Thank you, all of you, for your hospitality. I'm really glad to be here. I'd like to start with a prayer. Dear God, may you guide and oversee our time together. May you lead us to open our hearts to one another in curiosity, in love, in non-judgment, so that we may learn and grow from our encounter with one another. We're not here to prove that our side is right, but rather to approach one another as all made in your image, that we are all children of one Heavenly Father. Amen. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here. The way I see, and I do a fair amount of this. One thing I want to say almost at the beginning is that it would have been better actually for you to all come to my synagogue. Actually, you're all invited. I actually do host a lot of church groups during the academic year who want to come and experience a service, usually confirmation classes, as part of their religious school studies. A lot of church groups come and participate in a Friday night service. And it would be a lot easier to learn about Judaism or to experience Judaism in my environment rather than me just as a single representative talking about it. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I'm just one person. And Judaism is a really vast thing. And I dare say every single person in the room has a slightly different viewpoint of your own religion, and you're going to represent it slightly differently. So a lot of it is who you encounter to talk about. So I encourage you, if you want to learn more about Judaism, or there's a joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So if you ask, chances are if you were to ask another rabbi or someone else, another Jew even, about some of the things that we talked about tonight, you might get a different answer as well. And I'll try to be clear about, when I'm representing sort of like, a more standard Jewish view and where my own personal theology might be a little different. So one of the ways that I talked to Patrick about this when we were discussing this encounter, the way I think of as an interfaith encounter is the easy part is when we find things in common. Like, at our places of worship, we all have the same seats, so we gravitate. Or even more serious things like the golden rule that we share in common, and we both share the Old Testament and things of that nature. Although I'll talk to you about some of the differences between how Jews look at Hebrew Scripture and how Christians tend to look at the Old Testament. But the second level is where we get to sort of honestly air some of our differences, and that can be harder. When people think about the difference between Christians and Jews, they'll say, oh, well, Jews don't recognize Jesus, or they don't accept Jesus as God. And that's the main difference. And I actually think that's a pretty minor difference. There are a lot of more important differences between Judaism and Christianity that have to do with our different views of salvation, our different views of how forgiveness and atonement work, our different views on what happens after we die, our different views on grace or faith versus the law, and things of that nature. And then, the nature and where Jesus figures in, I almost feel like it's important, but there are many other important differences between Christianity and Judaism. And the final level, so the first level of interfaith dialogue is to talk about what we have in common. The second level is to discuss our differences, which is more challenging. And I really feel like it's important to not, as I sort of mentioned in my prayer, not to try to convince the other, because once we start doing that, then that puts the other on the defensive and so on and so forth. But more in a spirit of curiosity, like, oh wow, they look at this differently than we do. And then the third part is allowing myself to actually be moved by the other person's faith. Like maybe there's something in the other person's faith that makes me approach my own faith differently. Now that can be a little scary. It's like, oh, are you telling me to abandon what I believe in? No, not at all. I'm just telling you, I'm not telling you anything. I'm just saying that there's a possibility of thinking about things, even in my own faith, a little differently. And that's really challenging, but it's really rewarding. So let me give you an example how it worked in my life. My first serious engagement in Christian dialogue was when I was a student of a CPE student. So what that means is, as part of my seminary training when I became a rabbi, I decided to take a unit of CPE, which is to learn how to minister in a hospital to people to patients, you know. So basically like hospitals have chaplains. So it's like I became a student chaplain, and you know, I learned all about how to open myself up to healing and nurturing people who are sick or maybe even dying, and attending to their spiritual needs. So this is a hospital, so it's not just Jews. In fact, I was in a predominantly Christian setting. So all of my colleagues, or I think all but one of my colleagues, were Christian, and we're in a small group, and it's very intense because you're dealing with really, really serious issues. And I'm learning, so we're working on these different situations as a group. So one of the first things that that we were told to do was to pray with the patient, and to my surprise, my Christian colleagues were like, no problem, right? They just held hands, and out came this prayer. And it's like, I'm a Jew, I don't know how to do that, right? Because Jews tend to pray from a book. I mean, all of our prayers are scripted, they're formulaic. I mean, we have a bunch of different prayers for or blessings for every different circumstance. But the idea of like spontaneously saying something was terrifying. I mean, like, what am I supposed to say, you know? But for Christians, that's second nature. I mean, Christians are always talking to God and conversing with God, and spontaneous prayer just comes very, very naturally. Well, it didn't to me, and that was a real, there's nothing antithetical. I mean, Judaism permits spontaneous prayer. It's not like you have to pray from a prayer book, but it was just foreign to me. So I give that to you as an example of how an encounter with the other faith can make me rethink what I do as a Jew, right? So now, you know, I'm fine with spontaneous prayer. I do it all the time. So we can, I mean, I don't exactly, I mean, I thought maybe I could talk a little bit about some of the differences between Judaism and Christianity as I see it. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about me. But actually, this thing about spontaneous prayer, I think that one of the I mean, there's something deeper going on. Because Jesus was also a man, Jesus was both God but also incarnate, I think that Christians have a much easier time having a personal relationship with God as in terms of someone that you can talk to, because Jesus is a person, so you can talk to him just like you can talk to your friend, or you can talk to another person who is very, very dear to you. But because Jews don't believe that God can ever be in human form, it's harder for us, and we have a lot of debates about what are we actually doing praying to God, since God isn't a person, right? God is beyond everything. God is transcendent. God, in Judaism, God can never be described or pinned down, or Maimonides, who's a great rabbi, one of the greatest rabbis of all time, famously said that any label you attach to God is automatically limiting God's vastness. Like, you can't even use language when you talk about God. God is beyond anything you can say. So how do you pray to God then, if like God is beyond anything you can imagine? So I think that when you drill down, I think that's part of, that's a deeper layer to how, Christians can maybe access God more easily in a conversation because he's a person, whereas for us, that can never be. So it's like we have a harder time praying because who are we praying to? Not a person. So that's an example. Anyway, maybe I should tell you a little bit about myself. I spent my first half of my adult life in the computer industry. I lived in California, and I was doing well and was comfortable financially, but I felt like something was missing in my life. And so gradually, I grew up conservative, Jewish. I don't know if you know, but there are three denominations of Judaism in the United States: Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. Orthodox being the strictest and the most adherent to the commandments, and Reform is the least restrictive, the most modern, if you will, and Conservative is somewhere in the middle, and that's how I grew up. And I sort of fell away from religion altogether when I went to college. It wasn't that I turned my back on religion. It was more, I was a young adult and I was exploring a lot of different things and stuff. And as I say, I sort of got into a money-making career and then found that empty, and gradually worked my way back into I didn't study to become a rabbi immediately, but I got involved in a local synagogue, and then I was living in Vermont, and there was a community that was just starting up, and they needed a spiritual leader, and frankly, they couldn't afford an ordained rabbi at the time, so it was sort of like a good match because I had the skills from growing up as a conservative Jewish student, and so I went to seminary for 5 years to get my ordination while I was all the while serving this congregation in Vermont. And I was ordained in 2012, so that was 7 years ago. Sorry, I was ordained in 2010. I've been in Bloomington for 7 years. I was ordained in 2010, which was 9 years ago, and ended up in Indiana simply because I was looking for a full-time job. My job in Vermont was part-time, and this was a good fit. The congregation in Bloomington is a hybrid congregation. It's Reform and Conservative, so it's everything but Orthodox. And my own background is also diverse. Like I was raised conservative, but when I came back into Judaism, it was through, as an adult, it was through a Reform congregation, and the seminary that I attended was trans-denominational. So one of the things Jews are very confused about overall is, how many denominations you all have. I mean, we don't understand what distinguishes one denomination from another. The reason why Judaism has so few denominations, one second. The reason why Judaism has so few denominations, it's a fairly recent phenomenon. Until the 1800s, you were just Jewish. And I think this speaks to another very important difference between Judaism and Christianity overall, which is that Jews are very tolerant of each other's belief systems. So where Protestant denominations split over these fine lines of theology, Jews don't care. What we're generally more interested in is that you're a good person, that you perform good deeds. But even there, it's not like the community can ostracize anybody if they're, unrepentant or something like that. But in terms of belief and dogma, Judaism there's no creed in Judaism that everybody has to subscribe to. Even the most basic beliefs, like the unity of God, for instance, or even the existence of God, nobody has to stand up there and declare it, right? I mean, it's sort of assumed that if you're a Jew, you're going to believe in God, but, there's no test, or there's no requirement that you acknowledge that. And in fact, I mean, there are, at services on Friday, a woman came up to me and she said, "Oh, I'm a rabbinical student. Where are you studying to become a rabbi?" With the secular humanist seminary in Detroit. I said, "Oh, secular humanism, I've heard about them." So this is, I don't know if I would call it a denomination, but this is a group of Jews who, and they even have a seminary, and she's becoming a rabbi, but they don't believe in God. They're secular humanists. But it's Jewish. I mean, you can't deny that it's Jewish, because to be Jewish is not fundamentally to accept a belief. Like if you want to become Christian, you have to, accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and you're baptized, right? And if you want to be Jewish, it's not so simple. Judaism, to convert to Judaism, is a year or multi-year process, because you're not accepting a belief. You're actually joining a family. I often compare it to marrying into a family, because you're accepting. It's becoming part of a people, which shares a history, it shares a different language, which is Hebrew. It shares a different culture, and so it's not just a matter of belief, and it's So I think that's an important distinction. Where shall I go from here? Maybe I'm right at the cusp. I was told I could speak for 30 to 45 minutes before we open it up to questions. And I almost feel like maybe I want to be sure that I'm talking about stuff that you want to hear. So this table that I handed out to you, it's really dangerous to put an entire religion into two columns. Because all religions are complicated and they all have different ideas about different subjects. And to narrow it down into a couple of phrases is, grossly oversimplifying. So I definitely want to put that out. And also, I'm not so sure that what I put on the Christian side is, I'm no expert on Christianity. I'm an expert on Judaism. So you may disagree with the description on the Christian side, which is great. Tell me if I'm wrong or if you have different ideas about that. And I mean, the purpose of the table was to, give us a place to start with, and then we can talk about these things. So I guess I want to ask you, is there anything on the table or any aspect that you would like me to address and talk about, or anything else? Because we're at a half an hour, and so I'm right in at where I could turn it into a question and answer. Okay, so the first question is about the Old Testament. So, generally speaking, what Christians call the Old Testament, Jews call the Bible. Since we don't have a New Testament, it's the entire Bible for us. Generally speaking, they're the same, but the order of the books is different. I think that there are some books that are included in the Old Testament that are omitted in the Hebrew Bible. Or maybe there are different versions depending on whether you're Catholic or Protestant. I think there might be a difference in what's included in the Old Testament depending on whether you're Catholic or Protestant. One of the important things to say is that Christians read the Old Testament as prefiguring the coming of Christ. So there are many, many passages that Christians point to that predict the virgin birth or various parts of Jesus' career and so on. Jews don't read those passages that way. So Jews will take the same passage that Christians are certain refer to Jesus, and for Jews they don't refer to Jesus because Jesus doesn't figure in our theology. So for example, I don't know, you would know better than I mean, these verses are more important to Christians than they are to Jews. So a lot of times Christians will say, well, what do you think of this chapter and verse from the Old Testament? And often it's a verse that I'm not familiar with, although it can be very, very important to Christians. The second thing I want to say is about Scripture overall. So our sacred book is not the entire Hebrew Bible, but the Torah. Jews revere the Torah. The Torah are the first 5 books of the Old Testament, namely Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's our Torah, and it's handwritten out in a scroll, and the scroll is held in great reverence at any synagogue, and it's read every Sabbath in a sort of venerable way. It's taken out in a sort of pomp and circumstance, and it's chanted and studied reverently. And I almost feel like if there's anything that comes close to what Jesus represents to Christians, it's the Torah for Jews. Like, in the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Isn't that the beginning of the book of John? Well, the Word became flesh, according to Christians, but the Word never became flesh according to Jews. The Word is still there. It's the Torah. So that's why I say that for us, we love the Torah in a similar way to the way that Christians love Jesus. And so we engage the Torah. The Torah is often spoken about as if she were a person, often a woman. So that's one thing. The other thing is how we deal with Scripture. It's when Jews, and this is not just modern Jews, even Orthodox Jews, even traditional Jews, it's not just the words on the page. It's all of the commentary that people have written about the words on the page over the centuries. And I once read an analysis about how Christians approach Scripture versus how Jews approach Scripture, which I think is really accurate, and I want to convey it to you. That Christians are, that there is a truth that is expressed through the gospel or through Scripture. And our job as the recipients of the Word, of the divine Word, is to understand that truth to the best of our ability, right? But there's a truth in the document, and we need to understand that truth. That's the Christian way of approaching Scripture. The Jewish way of approaching Scripture is that the truth is not on the page. The Torah, as reverently as we treat it, is just words on a page, and the truth emerges when we are in dialogue with it. So that means that interpretation is where truth emerges, not the words itself, right? So it's a different approach to what truth is, in a way. And so you could say, oh, well, you can manipulate the Scripture to let it conform to whatever you want. No, I'm not saying that. I mean, there are limits to the elasticity of what can emerge from the text. What I am saying is that it's not like you're on a discovery mission to discover or discern what's on the page. You create that meaning every time you engage in it. So there's a famous statement that says that when God delivered the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai, God gave to Moses not just the 5 books of the law, but also what's called the oral law, which is of the same status in Judaism as the written law, which is the Talmud and all the other legal materials throughout the centuries, plus whatever any student in any classroom ever said about the Torah throughout history. All of that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. So it's a really kind of breathtaking statement, because it says that what God delivered, what revelation was not just that text on the page, but everything that anybody would ever say about it, out to infinity. So that's a different way. It's a really different way of engaging text. There's a whole literature in Judaism called Midrash, where it will take a verse in the Torah and just go spinning off into these very fanciful, imaginative stories. And it's like, where are you getting this from? But it's treated, with the same reverence and love as the words on the page. So was that kind of what you were asking about? Okay.
You mentioned earlier that you would tell us the difference. I didn't think you got to that.
Right. I wanted to mention how we approach Scripture differently overall. And I also wanted to mention how these passages that are so important to Christians because they deal with Jesus Christ directly don't. Now, some Jews I know will say, well, Christians are distorting the plain meaning of the text. Well, we do that too. Jews also sort of, I just got finished telling you that we have this body of literature called Midrash, which also derives, meaning from the text that seems like a far cry from its original context. One of the things I wanted to say overall, let me just have a sip of water. A lot of people think that Judaism is the parent religion, and then at a certain point Christianity branched off, and that Christianity is the daughter religion of Judaism, right? Do any of you think that way? Or no? Oh, okay. So maybe you're about to agree with what I agree with. Maybe you're about to agree with what I'm about to say. My conception is that there was or maybe you think that, I don't know, I won't presume to say what I think you might think. My conception is that the parent religion is biblical Judaism, or temple-centered Judaism, right? Because before the second temple was destroyed, and I say the second temple in particular because it was around that time that Jesus lived. The Judaism that was practiced was entirely different from the Judaism that's practiced today because it was temple-based. There was a system of priests, and they offered sacrifices, animal sacrifices, and so on. So when the temple was destroyed, and this isn't just my view, it's a kind of a scholarly view, but I sort of subscribe to it myself. It was a big crisis in the religion. It's like, how are we going to go on? There's no temple anymore. And besides which, the Romans have, completely destroyed the country and taken over. By the way, I was thinking about this as I was driving over. I'm sure you do not know that today is a very somber day, one of the most somber days in the Jewish calendar. Literally today, which ends at sunset. It's called Tisha B'Av, or the 9th of Av, and it actually today commemorates the destruction of the temple, both temples. By coincidence or by God's design, both temples were destroyed on the same Jewish day, which was today. The first in 586 and the 586 BCE. Jews say BCE rather than BC. And the second one in 70 CE. Jews say CE rather than AD. So it's sort of interesting that we're talking about the destruction of the temple on the day that commemorates the destruction of the temple. But so that was a crisis. It's like, how is our religion going to continue when there are no possibility for sacrifices anymore? And two child religions emerged from the same parent religion and dealt with that crisis in different ways. What emerged as Christianity and what emerged as Judaism, or I should say what rabbinic Judaism, because Judaism today is really rabbinic Judaism. The contours of Judaism that's practiced today is really was really created by the rabbis of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries as codified in the Talmud, which is a 72-volume compendium of laws and stories, and because until that point, nothing was written down. I mean, you had scripture, but how you actually practiced Judaism wasn't written down. And so the way I see it, and in summary, Christianity was one answer to the crisis of there's no temple anymore, how do we do sacrifices? And the answer was, well, we don't need sacrifices anymore because Jesus sacrificed himself to save all of humankind. One sacrifice of himself that would be good for all time. That was one way of solving the crisis that there's no temple. What emerged from on the rabbinic Jewish side was kind of the replacement of sacrifices and temple worship with study and the reverence of the written word, as I discussed earlier. So sort of two different responses to the same crisis. And so what I like to think of us more as sister religions rather than one being dominant over the other. One issue that sometimes arises in Christian thinking, which is problematic for Jews, is the idea of the new covenant, and the idea that the new covenant has replaced the old covenant. And for us, of course, that's we don't hold to that, because for us the old covenant is still in force. This kind of Christians will, I don't know if this is where you were going, but when it talks about the children of Israel in the Old Testament, Christians identify with that, right? As your ancestors, right? I mean, you see a line between the children of Israel and yourselves. Well, I mean, we do too. The children of Israel are also our ancestors. So, where should we go from here? Yes? Well, I mean, the Torah is central, but we also have the rest of the Old Testament. The Psalms are very important to us. The prophets, particularly the ethical prophets like Amos and Isaiah and Jeremiah, are also very important to us. Sure, I mean, we have all the rest of the books that constitute the Old Testament, but they're not held to the degree of reverence that we hold the Torah. That's all. And I'll also say that Jews are less familiar with the other books. They're very, very familiar with the first 5 books because we read them every week in the synagogue. We also read short passages of the prophets, but they're set. So we become very familiar with little chunks of the prophets, but we're less familiar. I mean, even I am a rabbi, and there are a number of books in, for example, the writings, like Chronicles, for instance. Daniel, which is a very important book to Christians, is less important in Judaism. So, yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, so when
Yeah.
your Messiah comes, what is going to happen? There's our Messiah that did come in the resurrection.
All right, so that's a whole another really big discussion, so let's talk about that. So the most simplistic thing to say is that for Christians, the Messiah has already come, and when he comes again, it will be the second coming. And whereas for Jews, the Messiah has not yet come, and when the Messiah comes, it'll be the first time. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. So the first thing I want to say is the whole difference between salvation and redemption. And this has a lot to do with the fact that that for Jews, it's all about life on earth. There's a line in the Talmud that says that 1 minute alive in this world is worth all of eternity in the world to come. And the reason is that once we are dead and in the world to come, or heaven, we cannot do works anymore. And since Judaism is so much about doing good deeds as opposed to faith, surrendering oneself to God, which is fundamental to Christianity, since to be Jewish, the most important thing is to be able to do good deeds, which you can't do in heaven. Presumably, we're up there enjoying being in the presence of God, but that's not so great as a Jew, because to be a Jew, you need to do good stuff. And so 1 minute in this world outweighs all of eternity in heaven, is the Jewish, a fundamental Jewish view. So what does that mean for salvation and redemption? Well, to a Christian, salvation is to join God, to be at the right hand of God, to live in the presence of Jesus. I mean, that's salvation. To a Jew, it's about, the term that's preferred is redemption, and it means making this world a better place. So the Messianic era is not considered Maimonides said that there is no difference between the Messianic era and the era that we live in now, except that we will, well, one part of it is a little nationalistic, that the Jews would be back in their land and the temple would be rebuilt, but that human beings would finally get along, that we would all live at peace. But that's the only difference. We would not all be swept up in heaven, and we would not all be, in some different realm or some different state of being. But that it would be this world oriented, but we would enter a new era of universal peace and brotherhood among humanity. Overall, I think another really important difference between Judaism and Christianity is that Judaism is really this world focused, whereas Christianity tends to be more next world focused. Like the point of living is, for a Christian, is to prepare oneself for heaven, which is not to say that Christians are unconcerned with what's going on in this world, not at all. I mean, I know Christians are also involved in good deeds and improving the world and so on, but the focus is different, and that's an important difference. And so, it's much deeper than, okay, the Messiah hasn't come yet. It's really more about a different idea of what the focus of our lives is. Well, only if God is. I'm being a little flip. The question was, is the Messiah male? And I said, if God is male, then the Messiah is male. No. In Judaism, in traditional Judaism, yes, the Messiah is a male figure. I will also say, and this is where I'll put in my personal theology, I don't believe in a Messiah who will be a human being. I believe in a messianic era. I believe in a period of universal peace as outlined and envisioned by Maimonides, but I don't necessarily believe that a single person will come and do that. One thing the Messiah. So I'm speculating here because I don't know much about Christianity, but the Messiah is God, right? I mean, the Messiah is Jesus, right? Okay, so the Messiah is a person in Judaism. So the Messiah that is talked about in traditional Judaism is a person who is mortal, and his job is only to announce or usher in this new era of universal peace, but then he'll die because he's a person. So yeah, I think that's important to note. I mean, for us, the Messiah is not God. The Messiah is just a person, a very special person, but a person nevertheless. I mean, the history of the Messiah. Originally in the Hebrew Bible or in the Old Testament, the Messiah was simply going to be a descendant of King David, that's all. Just somebody who would assume King David's throne and reinstate the monarchy of the Israelite kings. Christianity, of course, Jesus is a descendant of King David. Jesus' lineage goes back through King David. Has to be, because it has to conform to what's written in the Old Testament. But in the Old Testament, the Messiah is simply some descendant of King David's lineage who would come back and say, hey, I'm the king. Here I am. I'm reestablishing the kingdom. That was the original concept of the Messiah. Judaism hasn't strayed too far from that. Yeah. Well, I was about to say that I was about to talk about my own ideas about the Messiah. I mean, for me, the idea of the Messianic age is a hopeful one because I have a sort of progressive view of humanity. I believe that the world is getting better overall. That with each generation, I know there's a lot of horrible things going on in the world right now, and there's a lot of hatred and violence and war and poverty and so on and so forth. But I also, and I think this is part of my Jewish belief system, I believe in the goodness of humanity, and I believe that that overall that humanity is progressing over time. And so what I believe, and this is a fairly common modern Jewish belief, is that human beings will bring on the Messiah, not God. The traditional view is that God will, when the time is right, God will send the Messiah. But actually, it's not even such a modern Jewish view. Even a traditional Jewish view will say that our good deeds will bring the Messiah. And that's not even modern. I mean, even ancient rabbis talk about our capacity to bring the Messianic era closer through our good deeds. Again, it goes back to that idea that just how important good deeds are. I know that this is not universal among Protestants, but I know that among some Christians, there's this belief that it's quite the opposite. Things have to get really, 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 really bad. And actually, when there are horrible things happening in the world, that's actually a good thing because it's a sign that, the end is near. Jews don't understand that. That's really antithetical to, and I'm sure even a lot of Christians have trouble with that idea too, but I know it's out there among certain Christian groups, and it's pretty antithetical to how Jews think of the end of days. For us, the world has to get really, really good, and then the Messiah will come. Not things have to get really, really bad, and then the Messiah will come. Yeah.
You have in your list most important commandment, and then you also have something about justice, mercy, giving to the poor, and love. And to many of us, those all wrap into one thing. As far as our faith is. So how do you differentiate the difference between what you see in the Jewish tradition versus
what wraps into one thing? Justice and mercy, or?
Yeah. When I think of.
And I'm going to repeat the question. I know some of you can't hear, and it's not being recorded. I should be careful to do that. Yeah.
What I'm saying, I guess, is that some of us see, when we look at our New Testament, Jesus was asked the question, what's the most important commandment? And he said that the first one is to love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. And the second was to love your neighbor as yourself. You keep those two commandments, everything, is that draws everything together. And then we also, as Christians, many of us see part of that, loving our neighbor, being justice, mercy, giving to the poor, and doing good deeds. And you kind of say, and to support those that can't support themselves. So, is there a different take from your view than what we see?
Okay, so just to kind of repeat that, so in the New Testament, Jesus was asked, what are the two most important commandments? And he replies, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might, which is an important one for us as well. And then also love your neighbor as yourself, which is an important one for us as well. And then you were saying that everything else kind of flows from that, including giving to the poor, upholding justice, mercy, and so on. Actually, when you think of that, I think of the Micah passage, what does the Lord require of you? Only to love God, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God, right. What I had in mind when I was writing that, I don't disagree with you. What I have in mind, though, is exploring this idea that there's this that Judaism tends to be, if there is like a tension or opposition, that's too strong a word, but between justice and mercy, right? That Judaism tends to be more on the side of justice. We tend to be more, which isn't to say that love isn't important. But we're the religion of law, right? We're the religion and Christians, tend to emphasize love. And maybe even what you're saying is that you see justice as an aspect of love, whereas maybe we tend to see the two more in conflict. Like you can't have, sometimes to mete out justice, we have to soften our loving instincts, right? Take a parent, for example, who wants to discipline her child, as her love instinct says, no, I can't do this, but, she needs to discipline. So I'm just giving a little example of how. So, so that's sort of, so the thing about, let me talk about our concept of giving charity to the poor, which is illustrative, and I think will speak directly to exactly what you're asking. So Christians give charity to the poor as an extension of love, because you love your neighbor, or you love all human beings as an extension of God. That's why we have to give charity to people who are less fortunate than us. It's also about, I think, grace. I mean, just as we're the recipient of God's grace, then we need to be gracious to others. I think that's part of the Christian thinking. And even the word charity comes from the word caritas, which means love, right? So it's all about love for Christians. The word for charity in Hebrew is tzedakah, which means, it comes from the word tzedek, which means justice. And that means you give to charity, you give to the poor whether you feel like it or not. So the Jewish response would be, well, love is a feeling, right? And I don't want to rely on feeling before I am moved to give charity to the poor. You have to do it because it's commanded, right? It doesn't matter if you love that person, if you hate that person, if you're indifferent to that person. You have to, you're commanded to do so. It's an act of justice. So it's not about feeling. It's not based on an inner orientation of the heart. So for Christians, you cultivate the heart first, and then you give. It's all because what's fundamental for Christians, the first act is surrendering to God. That's the first act, and everything else flows from that. And that's based on love. And presumably when you surrender to God, you're going to want to do all these things because you want to please God, and you want to be, your life is filled with love at that point. So of course it's going to be easy. But for Jews, it's because it's not based on feeling. It's based on, you're commanded to do it. It's an act of justice. So it's a different orientation. I also think that this difference, we haven't talked about it, and it's important that we do, atonement, and the vastly different ways that Christians and Jews deal with the concept of sin. So for Jews, the idea that, I may be oversimplifying this, but my understanding of the Christian idea of atonement is that because Jesus died for our sins, what we need to do is surrender to Jesus, and that through God's love and grace, we will be forgiven. Whereas for Jews, you can only atone for your own sins. The idea of anybody else atoning for my sins is kind of incomprehensible. There are all these steps that you do when you have transgressed either against a human being or against God, and by doing that, you can achieve God's forgiveness. One of the things that I was very curious about as I was thinking about this yesterday, this question of atonement, if you transgress against God, I mean, transgressions can be divided into two categories. Transgressions against God, which really don't harm anybody else, like in Judaism, ritual transgressions, like violating the Sabbath, for example, would be a transgression against God. But then, of course, you can transgress against another human being. And what I'm unclear about in the Christian view is, you do have to make restitution after you've sinned against another human being. I mean, aren't you supposed to, make amends and apologize and seek restitution? It's not enough, is it, to, just receive God's grace for forgiveness? I'm asking because I'm unclear about that.
In my opinion, this is just my opinion, I guess. As a human being, you ought to be going and asking forgiveness for somebody. But it's very easy for us to save up these transgressions and, pray for forgiveness and not go and seek. And I think it's a spectrum among Christians.
Okay.
Personally,
Right.
how they deal with things. And of course, we have the communion where we celebrate Jesus' gift to us of dying on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
And we ask forgiveness at that time as well.
Okay, that's something I didn't know. So the sacraments function, communion in particular, functions as a way of achieving atonement.
I think some of us feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say it's every Christian. Again, it's just as different from one person as it is to another.
Right. So
I think you exposed a moment that lots of us let ourselves off the hook.
Say it again.
I think you've exposed a moment where lots of us let ourselves off the hook. Because Jesus' teaching around this is that before we can get right with God, we've got to go to our brother and resolve whatever the transgression is.
Okay.
So I think
That's very close to the Jewish view.
I think this is one thing that modern Christianity has kind of slid into I'm just going to pray about it and I'll get forgiveness from God.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is I think what Doreen's mentioning, then we kind of accumulate all these transgressions that we never circle back to healing. And
Right.
I actually think that's counter to the teaching of Jesus.
Okay. Right. Which brings up another issue, which is that Jesus was a Jew after all. So a lot of his teachings were probably in sync with Judaism, although, as I mentioned earlier, the Judaism at that time is not the Judaism that's practiced today. But no, I think you know that, you may or may not know, but we have a really, really important holiday in our calendar called the Day of Atonement. And it's the kind of holiday where Jews come out of the woodwork to celebrate. Even non-observant Jews who rarely step foot in synagogue, they will not fail to come to services on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement. So I know you have Easter and Christmas. Easter even more important than Christmas in terms of people coming to church. even those who don't come any other time of the year will come on Easter and Christmas. For us, it's what we call the high holidays, which is New Year's Day, and the Day of Atonement, which is 10 days later. So why the Day of Atonement? I think because people want to come clean. People want to, people want to repent and feel that their transgressions have been forgiven by God. But as the pastor just said, God cannot grant atonement for transgressions against another human being until we have gone to that human being and tried to appease them and make amends to them. There are differences in Judaism and Christianity there too, because I know that isn't there a verse in the New Testament that says go 1,000 times or something like that? Or am I thinking of something else?
So, they were asked how many times we have to forgive.
Right.
And the guy asked, is it 7?
70 times 7. That's what I was thinking of. Right. So in the New Testament, Jesus says that you have to ask for forgiveness 70 times 7 times.
How would it,
But what I wanted to tell you is that Judaism puts a limit of 3. You go and ask for forgiveness 3 times. So, okay, that's totally different. That's totally different. Okay, I was thinking about, yeah. Anyway, in Judaism, the Talmud says that what if you go and ask for forgiveness and the person says no, because they're full of resentment or they're hard-hearted or something. And Judaism puts a cap and says you only have to go 3 times, and then it says the transgression is on them because they're refusing to forgive. So in a way, that's a little consistent with Jesus' ruling, which is that you should be open-hearted and willing to forgive. But there are other differences that reminds me of too, like the whole notion of loving your enemy and turning the other cheek, which is really prominent in the New Testament. That's another example where Jews are more concerned about justice. It's like, what if your enemy continues to hate you? How often do you have to turn the other cheek? And do you have to put yourself in positions of abuse and that kind of thing? So, the way I see it, a lot of these ethical issues are issues of competing values. Love is an important value, justice is an important value, and sometimes they're in tension. You have to draw the line. And I think Christianity often draws the line more on the love side, and Judaism draws the line more on the justice side. But it's flexible. It's on a continuum. So, yeah. That's right. You got it exactly right. Ava Kor preached a radical, and her idea, she preached, and it's very beautiful, this idea of radical forgiveness, where she basically forgave the Nazis for what they did to her, and she never was received well by the Jewish community overall. I've met her, and in fact, in my capacity as the chair of the Indiana Board of Rabbis, we invited her to address us several years ago, and I think she wanted to meet us because I think she always felt excluded and maybe hurt a little bit that the Jewish community didn't treat her with more welcome. But the Jewish community Judaism overall has a tough time with this kind of notion of radical forgiveness, which is much more at home in a Christian setting, which is why she was beloved more by Christian communities than by the Jewish community. So you have it exactly right. And let me just say, I really understand, I really know and appreciate what Eva Kor was trying to do. I mean, her main message is something that I agree with, that resentment and holding on to the failure for forgiveness doesn't hurt them anymore. They're beyond it. The only person that holding resentment hurts is ourselves. So now you're asking, what is the general view of the Holocaust among Jews today? Well, that's a big topic. I think somebody else asked me that after or before the session. I could go in a few different directions here. Well, let me first say that the trauma of the Holocaust was, it was unprecedented. It was unprecedented in the history of humanity, and it was unprecedented in the history of the Jewish people. And we are at a point where the last people who experienced the Holocaust or lived through the Holocaust are now dying out, and they'll all be dead within 10 or 20 years. And so in the early part, so it reinforces victimhood idea among Jews that that we're perpetual victims, and the event of the Holocaust is also intricately connected in the Jewish mentality with the birth of the State of Israel, right? Even though they're not, historians will say, well, Israel would have been created anyway, even without the Holocaust. Mentally, there are two amazing events that happened in the history of the Jewish people 3 years apart, right? The Holocaust ended in 1945, and the State of Israel was created in 1948. And it's sort of like death and resurrection, in the space of 3 years. So among the older generation, this kind of fear mentality, because they lived through the Holocaust, remained. I would say until recently, maybe very recently, like this past year, which I'll talk about in a split second, among the younger generation, Holocaust memory was eroding because Jews overall, especially in the United States, have been fairly well accepted, and we haven't really worried so much about being the victims of oppression and prejudice, particularly when I was growing up. I grew up on the East Coast, and I never thought about anti-Semitism. I lived in a predominantly Jewish area, and I never really worried so much about, that people would pick on me or single me out because I was Jewish. I have to say, and you probably know this, but the events the last couple of years, particularly the attack in the synagogue in Pittsburgh and then in California, and also the anti-Semitic rhetoric that has been prevailing over the last couple of years has gotten Jews on edge. Even our own synagogue, which used to have open doors and welcome people, we now lock our doors routinely, which we never used to do. And you can imagine that was a difficult decision and a contentious decision, because we like to think of ourselves as welcoming, and the idea of a locked door, but sort of the needs for safety sort of outweigh those concerns, and people are scared. And that's a new